On today's Newsmakers, a powerful new film, Surviving Leukemia, and a documented miracle. That and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each and every week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable news figures. On today's Newsmakers, we have a very special conversation about the power of miracles. I am blessed to be the host of the new film, Investigating the Supernatural Miracles. It explores whether miracles are real and whether they are still happening today. For our first segment, we're going to show you the full trailer of Investigating the Supernatural Miracles. It's a film you will not want to miss. Check it out.
I got out of my patrol car and I slipped.
I went from having a promising career as a neuroscientist to having a medical death sentence.
I said there was nothing else that we could do. There was no heartbeat.
Time of death, 8:05.
Are miracles real? Do they happen today? Let's investigate.
Some Christians will recoil in fear at the prospect because what if you look for evidence and don't find it? Are you going to end up losing your faith because you look at something and it falls apart?
I didn't know how to win. Everything about medicine said this was a bad diagnosis, he wouldn't make it.
We started asking at that point, are there healings in the present day that go beyond what modern medicine can accomplish?
She had both eyes open. We got to 2125. Hallelujah! Been totally blind.
So how do you know this wasn't psychosomatic, a misdiagnosis, something that was being missed in that process?
Often skeptics will say, well, have you thought about this? It could be explained by groupthink, mass hysteria, the manipulation of people.
And explicitly, the worry of scientific naturalists is that this is going to thrust us back into the dark ages.
A lot of skeptics will say, well, miracles are impossible. Why? Because they violate the laws of nature. You can't violate the laws of nature.
People would pray for me, and sometimes it felt like this power that just zapped me.
When I woke up, she says, can you do anything that you didn't do before? I looked at my hand that was clutched. I said, hand move.
Another doctor came in and he said, what is going on in here? He's dead. It's over. I said, shock him one more time.
Well, maybe it happens. Maybe it doesn't. Let's look at the evidence.
You can watch the film at cbn.com/supernatural. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. Next up, we're welcoming Cameron Cortman, a man who was diagnosed with leukemia when he was just 1 year old. Despite a potentially fatal diagnosis, his mother's trust in God and a divine message changed absolutely everything. Let's welcome Cam to Newsmakers to share his incredible journey. So Cameron, you've got a crazy story, and I want to dive into this. You know, we're going to talk about a bunch of things today, but your personal story, just getting to know you, has been really touching to me, and I want to get into that. We're also going to talk about your role at Great American Media and plenty more, but let's start with your cancer journey, because when I heard this story, I was blown away. Your family went through something really unimaginable, a 4-year battle with leukemia. Let's go back and let's start, take us through how your parents realized something wasn't right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you could hear my story and my testimony and not believe that there is a God. So yeah, my journey starts when I was only 1 year old. Both of my parents were working for a pretty well-known lawyer in the conservative Christian space, and they were supposed to move to Virginia Beach with him that day. And I got sick with an ear infection in the hustle and bustle of moving. My mom took me to the doctor. She thought it was just a routine ear infection. I had been getting them a lot lately. We showed up to the doctor. He gives us antibiotics. Everything is kind of normal. He wasn't concerned. And as we were about to leave, my mom stopped him and said, actually, on the way over here, the Lord spoke to me and told me that something is seriously wrong and that we need to go to the hospital. which is just a wild thing to
It's
say
wild.
to a doctor. But thankfully, the doctor was a Christian, and he said, who am I to really argue with the Lord? So we can send you to the hospital. I don't know why I'm doing that, but let's do it. So they called an ambulance. We go to the hospital. My parents recall that in the ambulance, I was just sitting up completely fine, eating goldfish. And, all the emergency workers were like, why is he even going? So we pull up and, my mom was just super confident that the Lord did speak to her and that this was an intentional decision. So they start to run pretty much every test imaginable. And they come back a few hours later and say, we're so sorry, 95% of your son's blood cells are leukemia. He probably won't make it through the night.
Okay. When your mom and your dad heard that, what were they feeling in those moments?
Yeah, I think as you can imagine, it's just a mix of utter disbelief and shock and starting to grieve and really just confusion of what to do. And I think you kind of immediately go into a mode of, okay, let's figure out next steps. You kind of flip the switch into your brain of like, let's figure out how to fix this thing. So I think that's kind of the route that they went. So they just immediately began pretty intense chemotherapy. And,
And you were one, just to reiterate
yeah,
that, like you're a baby, okay,
yeah.
going through insane chemotherapy.
Yeah. And I just can't imagine being my parents in that situation. You wake up in the morning, you think you're moving to a new state and that everything's completely fine. And then that night to find out that your son might pass away at any moment, like nothing could test their faith quite like that. And, I'm sure we'll get to this later, but I said this earlier, but so much of my faith is I credit to them because I think most people in situations like that, it's very easy for them to turn against God, turn against each other. You hear stories all the time of people that used to be Christians, but then went through something like this and now don't believe in God, or divorces that come out of these things. So the fact that they relied on God through that and then came out on the other side stronger, their marriage is still very strong and that their faith is still very strong. I don't think that I would have the same faith that I have today had they not responded the way they did through that whole journey.
So you go through these 4 years and then somehow, going from 95% plus leukemia cells to none, like how did that happen? How old were you? Take us through that.
Yeah, so it just kind of was 4 years of hospital stays and, months at a time at the hospital, just intense chemo. And, it was one of those situations where, okay, I lived a week. Then they're like, let's see how long he can live, basically, which is crazy to say. I can't even imagine being my parents and just never really knowing if I was going to make it the next day or the next month or the next year. But it was just 4 years of intense chemo treatment. And then, one day they were just like, it's completely gone, it's miraculous almost. And what's crazy about that situation, other than the fact that I was completely cured from cancer, is they said to my parents, although he is cancer free, he's not out of the woods. So there is a very good chance that he's not able to speak like everyone else would. He might not be able to walk. He might not be able to talk. When you go through such intense chemo for so long, the chances of it having serious side effects on your brain, on your body is very high. So to go from that to where I am today, a former college athlete that had the opportunity to play sports at the highest level, it's just only God.
So what's your earliest memory of understanding like what was going on, or understanding what you went through even?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question because it's like, how do you separate what your parents have told you versus like your actual memories? But I think one of my earliest memories is the day that I was cured from cancer officially. And I remember just like getting home and pretty much everyone we had ever met, like our prayer community, everyone was there and just threw me this giant party. And that is a day that I remember so vividly, even though I was so young, of just like, it's definitely a blessing that my earliest memory from that whole situation is the day that I was officially cured. So,
Instead of the other stuff that you could have been remembering that,
right.
Clearly was not pleasant or easy.
Totally.
So like, okay, so obviously you're healed. Did you have at that point or at any point fear yourself of reoccurrence, fear that this would come back?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that will always be in the back of my mind and is for any cancer survivors. I think it definitely decreases the older you get, right? And the longer it's been since you've had it. But I think when I was young and growing up, it definitely was a major fear and anxiety inducing thing of like, this could come back at any time, right? And just because I've had it doesn't mean that I'm out of the woods and that it won't come back. So it was definitely tough navigating that being so young. And another tough piece of it too, and I know you touched on this earlier, of there are so many kids who went through what I went through but didn't have my end result, you know? So meeting people, telling them my story or them hearing my story and saying, oh, well, my son had leukemia and didn't make it. And it's kind of like, that's a lot for a elementary school kid to process, saying kind of like, well, why did I make it and these other kids didn't? What makes me so special? So I think it's so interesting navigating all of that from such a young age of like, okay, the Lord saved me for a reason. Let's think about this through the positive lens, not through the lens of like, there's so much pressure and anxiety on me because he did save me.
Final question for you, and it's kind of a heavy one, I guess. I mean, maybe you won't think it is, but I think it is. There are a lot of people right now who are probably watching or listening who they're dealing with a diagnosis, they're dealing with a kid, a grandkid, and they're not seeing the healing, right? Your parents went through this for 4 years with you and they're struggling. I mean, what would your advice be to them in the midst of that uncertainty?
Yeah, I think, trust is such a cliche Christian answer, but I think really trusting in the Lord. And, but what does that practically look like? And I think it's living faithfully every day. So I think when we get focused on the macro is that when we get really overwhelmed and frustrated when we're not seeing the healing or the results from the things we're praying through. But I think if we just focus on the next day and that day living faithfully and honoring the Lord, days turn into weeks, turn into months. And before you know it, you really start to see your trust grow. And so even to this day, I remind myself of like, okay, I'm trusting the Lord by living faithfully when my feet hit the ground this morning. And I'm just going to focus on these 24 hours and what I can do for his kingdom and not worry about anything else beyond that.
I love that. Well, Cam, you're an inspiration. Thanks for sharing your story. Really appreciate it today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Billy.
You can watch Cameron's full journey on the CBN News YouTube page, and you can see other stories just like this one on investigating the supernatural, miracles. It's streaming right now at cbn.com/supernatural. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we are sitting down with Chris Gunderson. He's a man who miraculously was healed after never being able to eat one single meal his entire life until he was prayed over and something profound happened. We touch on his story in investigating the supernatural, miracles, and he's here today to share deeper details with us. Here he is. Let's kind of go back. You as a baby were diagnosed with a very serious digestive issue. Let's just start there. Tell us a little bit about that and how it impacted your life.
Yeah, so I was born with a syndrome called chronic pseudo obstruction syndrome, and it was a congenital defect. So I was born with it. Basically, where my stomach was completely paralyzed. They call it complete gastroparesis, and it wouldn't pump anything from my stomach to my small intestine. So everything I ate for when I was a child, um, for actually for when I was an infant would just projectile vomit and just vomit everything up. And so I wasn't able to actually get any kind of nutrition for a long period of time. It took my parents and the doctors several studies and diagnostic tests to figure out that that was truly the case, that I had complete gastroparesis.
You were not able to eat solid food at all, correct? I mean, at all until you were a teenager, which we'll get into.
No, yeah. I was really only able to eat food just to have for the taste and the socialization, but I wasn't able to digest it. So I'd either spit it out and just have it for taste, or I would have it be drained out through another tube into my stomach. I had two tubes. One was connected to my stomach to be able to decompress everything, stomach acids, saliva that I would swallow, as well as a little bit of food that I would swallow that would be able to get through a very small hole in my stomach. And then I would have another tube connected to my small intestine that was where I was getting the nutrition from, the formula.
This goes on. How did this affect you? Not just physically, and let's start there, but also mentally, socially, spiritually. I mean, this seems like a massive deal that would really upend anybody's life.
You know, the blessing in disguise was that I was born with it, so I didn't really know any different aside from what I could see from my peers and my siblings. But it was my normal. But I think the most difficult part with being a very active child was just to keep up with the energy level that I had expanded all the time. And so there was a scenario all the time during PE class back in grade school where I would get dizzy. And so my PE teacher would have me lay on the ground and put my feet up to be able to help with that. But I felt like I could never actually keep up with the amount of energy that I was expending. So it made it where I'd get tired and fatigued and actually almost pass out multiple times.
So at some point, you guys decide to go to an event where there are healing prayers being uttered, right? I mean, you decide. What was it that caused your family, even though you didn't necessarily believe this was something that could happen, to go to that event?
So Bruce Venata, this was back in November of 2011, and Bruce Venata was at this benefit dinner for children in Honduras, and he was telling his testimony. My parents had attended, and my mom was hearing his testimony, and during the whole time that Bruce was talking, my mom was hearing God tell her to go talk to him. He was saying a lot of familiar medical terminology that most people wouldn't really know because of what Bruce had gone through and what I've gone through. And God had made it where there was no one talking to him at the time, so she went up and talked to him and told him about me. I was actually currently home at the time. I wasn't there, but she had asked if he could pray for me, and he's like, "Where's he at?" He said that he was at home, didn't want to come here because he's a 16-year-old, not wanting to come to a benefit dinner. So he said that he was going to be talking at this church for the next day on Sunday, and why don't you bring your whole family there? And so she had come home with my dad and told me about it. And it wasn't really like I was in denial that it could happen, but there was some thing that kind of got to me when she was telling me about his story, his testimony, and I'm like, you know what? Sure, why not? I was actually really excited to like meet Bruce, hear his testimony, and like the more I like thought about it later on, the more I like came to realize that I was going to get healed.
When you were feeling that, was that a spiritual feeling? Like you felt like God was delivering that message to you that the healing was going to come?
He had given me a little nudge that night, but especially when we were there at that church the next day, um, I had this pulsating sensation in my abdomen that I hadn't had before. And I was like, what's going on? And God said he's preparing me. And I haven't really ever heard from God too much before in my spirit. I didn't know how to really listen to his voice, listen to the Holy Spirit's voice. And so I was kind of having like this dialect with God. And he said that I'm preparing you and I'm working on you. And I told him back then I had a very severe stutter. Like I couldn't talk or anything. I had a terrible stammer. I had tics and everything that I was just trying to like force words out, just wouldn't flow or anything. So I told God for when I was 16, during that time that I was having that pulsating sensation, that I said, if you heal me, I will not be quiet about it. I'll tell anyone and everyone about this testimony, about this miracle that you did for me. And so now we're here.
Now we're here.
But,
I mean,
yeah.
So final question for you, because the story is incredible. How did this, not what, but how did this change your view of God, and where are you now today with him because of it?
Before my tubes, I saw God as this higher being that's just kind of up there and not really having a deep, meaningful relationship with us. And now I actually have this inner dialect with him on, I would say, not a daily basis, because I'm not a perfect person. I'm not always in prayer on a daily basis. I try to, but I would at least say on a weekly basis, like I'm always reaching out to him, and I feel like it's this two-way conversation, and like it's made me a better person. I'm not perfect. I actually fell into some sin shortly afterwards, doing stupid stuff, and so um if you sin or whatever, your healing's not going to be taken away. I actually was told by one of my teachers that my healing was going to be taken away because I had sinned, or I should be careful or something like that. I'm like, you know what? When God does something, he does it. And it's for you to be a blessing to others for, and to have that testimony for as well. But it made me also realize that like it's okay to fall short, because we all fall short of the glory of God, and just to keep trying, because it's a continuous relationship and a continuous walk with him.
Well, I appreciate you joining us, taking us through all this. It's an incredible testimony. People can see us actually talk about it and break it down in the documentary. And I'm just grateful that you came on and spoke with us. Would love to have you back again, and appreciate your time today.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Billy.
What a powerful story. We will be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. That's all for Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head on over to the CBN News YouTube channel for the full interviews that you saw on today's episode. You can also be sure to check out our new documentary, Investigating the Supernatural Miracles, at cbn.com/supernatural. As for this show, we will see you again next week.